Quoth the Raven, nevermore. Hello everyone and welcome to day 23 of Terrorthon. Today I would like to discuss a very influential author to the horror genre. It simply wouldn't be the same without him. We are of course discussing Edgar Allan Poe today. I would like to imagine that most people in the world have heard of Edgar Allan Poe, but just in case you haven't, or maybe you wanted to learn some fun facts about him, then here you are. Edgar Allan Poe was considered a central figure of the Romanticism movement in America and was one of the earliest users of the short story format, and he invented the entire detective fiction genre, so we wouldn't have Sherlock Holmes or Poirot without him. Pretty incredible stuff, and he was the first known American author to ever earn a living through writing alone. But let's rewind a little bit. Let's go back to the very beginning. Edgar Poe was born in Boston, January 19th, 1809. He was a child of an actor and an actress, but unfortunately his father left the family in 1810 and then his mother died the next year. So Edgar became adopted by John Allan, and that's how he got the name Edgar Allan Poe. As he grew up, he found himself unable to support himself, so he joined the US Army in 1827, and that same year he released his first book, which was called Tamerlane and Other Poems. He purposely got himself court-martialed in 1831 and pleaded not guilty at his trial because he wanted to be dismissed from the army. And because Mr. Poe's life was essentially a series of unfortunate events, shortly after this his brother passed away, which spurred Poe to focus more on his writing career. But he had a very difficult time with it because back in those days there was no international copyright law, especially not for books, and Americans often republished British works, and publishers often didn't even pay their authors or would delay their payment to extreme lengths, and because of this Poe was often reduced to begging. In 1833, his book M.S. Found in a Bottle brought him to the attention of a rich Baltimorean called John P. Kennedy, who introduced him to Thomas W. White, the editor of the Southern Literary Messenger. Poe became the assistant editor, for a couple of weeks at least, before he was discharged for being drunk at work. At age 26, he obtained a license to marry his 13-year-old cousin Virginia Clem, who was his third wife. I certainly didn't know that until today. His previous wives had left him for being unstable. Shortly afterwards, he was hired back at the Messenger after promising good behaviour, and there he published several poems, reviews and stories. In 1838, the narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym was published and widely reviewed, which was Edgar Allan Poe's first big break. The next year, in 1839, he became the assistant editor of the very popular Burton's Gentleman's Magazine, where he published more articles, reviews and stories. And that same year he released a compendium called Tales of the Grotesque and Arabesque. And then unfortunately his wife Virginia became sick with tuberculosis, which caused Poe to drink much more heavily. And then in 1845 The Raven was published in the Evening Mirror paper, and Edgar Allan Poe became an instant sensation and an overnight household name. And then 2 years later his wife Virginia died January 30th in 1847, and because of this the drinking increased and Poe became even more unstable. On October 3rd, 1849, Edgar Allan Poe was found delirious on the Baltimore streets, and he died in hospital 4 days later. His cause of death remains unknown to this day. Some theories include heart disease, epilepsy, syphilis, or even rabies. Despite being considered mostly a literary critic during his time, he has since become one of the most influential Gothic horror writers of all time. His works were adapted for the big screen many times, but some of the most famous examples were by Universal Studios, who made Murders in the Rue Morgue in 1932, The Raven in 1935, and the previously discussed Mystery of Marie Roget in 1942. But then again in the 60s, inspired by Hammer Film Productions, Roger Corman began what was known as his Poe cycle. He released House of Usher in 1960, The Pit and the Pendulum in 1961, and The Raven in 1963, and more, and most of these starred legendary horror actor Vincent Price. And his legacy endures even to this day, often imitated but never surpassed. Thank you, Mr. Poe, for all of your contributions. Horror simply would not be the same without you. See you tomorrow.